Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're taking a stack of your sources, articles, research notes, and diving deep into a figure who pops up early in the biblical story. He's often a little mysterious, even seems to have a few different names. Moses' father-in-law.
Exactly. He might seem like, a supporting character, but our sources show he plays a truly pivotal role.
Yeah.
He offers Moses refuge when he really needs it, gives him his daughter in marriage, and maybe most crucially, offers advice that fundamentally shapes the early Israelite nation.
Right. But like you said, the sources immediately present a puzzle, almost a linguistic knot. This one key figure seems to be called different things, and there's a specific question that comes up around a name you might have seen, Hobab.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So our mission in this deep dive is to unpack these names, maybe solve that Hobab conundrum, understand his Midianite origins, and what our sources say is a surprising religious background.
Okay.
And then reveal his profound and lasting impact on Moses' leadership and really the very structure of Israelite society.
Think of this as your shortcut to really getting a handle on a character whose story is way more complex, more influential than you might realize. Okay, let's jump right into this naming puzzle first.
Let's do it. So when you first encounter Moses' father-in-law in Exodus chapter 2, specifically verse 18, he's introduced as Reuel.
Reuel. Got it.
He's described as a priest of Midian, whose daughters Moses helps out at the well. That seems straightforward enough, right?
Yeah, that seems clear. But then
Just a couple of chapters later, Exodus 3.1, the text is talking about Moses' father-in-law again, but suddenly calls him Jethro, also identified as the priest of Midian.
Jethro. Okay, so Reuel, now Jethro. And Jethro is the name used for his most famous appearance later, right? In Exodus 18, where he gives that critical advice.
That's the one. And just to add one more layer, Exodus 4.18 uses yet another name, Jethro.
Jethro. So, 3 names now.
Yeah. Our sources suggest this could be a simple textual variant, maybe a slightly different spelling.
Right.
Or possibly even like a shortened version of Jethro. So now we have Reuel, Jethro, and Jether floating around for seemingly the same guy.
Okay, that is confusing. How do the sources, the scholarly work, help us make sense of these variations? Is one name the right one?
That's the question, isn't it? Scholarly theories offer a few interesting possibilities. One idea, based partly on the meaning of the Hebrew root for Jethro, which relates to abundance or excellence, is that Jethro might not actually be his personal name at all.
Oh, so maybe it's like a title.
Exactly. Perhaps it was a title of respect or authority, something like His Excellency or the preeminent one. Under this theory, Reuel, or Reuel, which is how the Greek Septuagint translates it in that Exodus 2 verse, could actually be his given personal name.
That makes a lot of sense for a respected leader or priest. What about Jewish tradition, though? Our sources mention that takes a different perspective.
It does. Jewish tradition has interpreted these variations, and actually others found elsewhere, to suggest he had 7 different names.
7 names, wow.
Yeah. Reuel, Jethro, Hobab, Heber, Keni, and Putiel. It's a way of harmonizing the different mentions in the text.
Are those names seen as just synonyms, or do they represent something more in that tradition?
Often they're interpreted as reflecting different aspects of his character, maybe virtues or key achievements throughout his life. So Jethro might be linked to him overflowing with good deeds, and Hobab could be related to him being beloved. It's a really rich way of understanding the character.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, and this is something our sources dig into that connects to the very fabric of the Bible itself. The presence of these distinct name variations, Reuel, Jethro, Jether, isn't necessarily just about titles or multiple names for one person in every single case.
Right.
Our sources point out that this actually lifts the lid on the underlying literary composition of the Pentateuch.
That's a crucial point. It suggests that the ancient writers or editors who compiled the text were, weaving together different source documents or traditions.
Different traditions.
Yeah, and different traditions seem to have known or maybe preferred different names for this figure. For example, the tradition often labeled by scholars as the Yahwist, or J's source, seems to favor Reuel.
Okay.
While the tradition known as the Elohist, or E source, tends to use Jethro.
So seeing these names side by side in the final text is a bit like finding fingerprints from the different ancient documents that were brought together.
Precisely. It tells us something significant about how the biblical narrative was constructed. It's a complex tapestry. Distinct traditions were preserved and unified, and sometimes, as we see here, those variations, like the name used for Moses' father-in-law, remain visible in the final unified account.
It's not always a single, seamless narrative voice from beginning to end.
Exactly. And the names are a clue to that process.
Which brings us to the most persistent naming challenge, the one we call the Hobab conundrum. This is where it seems like the text might even contradict itself directly.
It certainly looks that way on the surface, especially in English translation. In Numbers 10.29, Moses is speaking to someone described as Hobab, the son of Reuel the Midianite, Moses' father-in-law.
Okay, that seems clear. Hobab is the son of Reuel, who is Moses' father-in-law, making Hobab Moses' brother-in-law.
Right, brother-in-law. Seems straightforward. But then you read Judges 4.11, and it says Hobab, the father-in-law of Moses, using that same Hebrew word, chutun.
Wait, how can he be both the son of Moses' father-in-law, the brother-in-law, and Moses' father-in-law himself? That sounds like a head-on collision.
It does, doesn't it? And this is where diving into the original Hebrew is absolutely key. The word used in both those verses, translated as father-in-law, is chutun.
Chotun. Okay.
While father-in-law is a common translation, scholarly analysis reveals the word has a broader meaning in ancient Hebrew.
Okay, so it's not just strictly father-in-law in every single context.
Exactly. It could mean any relative by marriage on the wife's side from the husband's perspective. Essentially, a male in-law connected through the wife.
Ah,
It specifically refers to the husband's relationship with his wife's male relatives, emphasizing the connection marriage creates. It's not quite as precise as our modern terms.
okay, so it's about the scope of the word, maybe not necessarily a precise modern family label like we use.
Precisely. It's a more general term for a male relative by marriage from the husband's viewpoint, distinct from terms used for, say, a wife's in-laws or other family members.
So how does that broader meaning of Chotun resolve the Hobab puzzle?
It resolves it beautifully. Given that broader meaning, the widely accepted resolution based on our sources is that Hobab is indeed the son of Reuel,
So brother-in-law.
brother-in-law, exactly what Numbers 10.29 explicitly states.
And Judges 4.11 when it calls Hobab Moses' Chotun.
It's using the term in its broader sense of brother-in-law, or just a male relative by marriage, connected through Moses' wife, Zipporah. Remember, she was Reuel's daughter and Hobab's sister. It's not necessarily claiming he was Moses' direct father-in-law.
That lines up perfectly and removes the contradiction. Plus, our sources point out that Exodus 18.27 suggests Reuel, or Jethro, the father-in-law, had already left the Israelite camp before the events described in Numbers 10.29, where Moses is talking to Hobab.
Making it much more likely that Hobab, the son and brother-in-law, was the one present in Numbers 10.29 and the one mentioned as Moses' Chotun in Judges 4.11, using that broader meaning of the term.
So understanding that nuance in the Hebrew word chotun is fundamental. It unlocks what looks like a glaring contradiction in English translations,
Right.
and shows us how our modern, very precise kinship terms can sometimes obscure the more flexible meaning of ancient languages. It's a great example of how these linguistic deep dives clear things up.
It really is. Now, to fully understand this figure, whether you call him Reuel or Jethro, and to understand Hobab's place, we need to look at where they came from. Midian.
Right, their origins and the religious landscape they lived in.
Our sources tell us the Midianites are identified way back in Genesis 25, verses 1 to 2, as descendants of Abraham through his second wife, Keturah.
Keturah. Okay, so not through Sarah.
Right. That's significant. It means they shared a common ancestor with the Israelites, albeit a more distant connection, a kind of extended family link maybe.
And they were nomadic.
Primarily. They weren't really city builders in the same way. They were known for herding, just as Jethro and his daughters were when Moses met them. Though they also participated in the lucrative caravan trading routes and sometimes, less flatteringly, banditry.
Where exactly was Midian located, do we know?
Traditionally, it's placed in northwestern Arabia, along the eastern side of the Gulf of Aqaba, but sources suggest their territory might have been fluid, maybe extending into the Sinai Peninsula as well.
And that geographical proximity is crucial.
Absolutely. It's why Moses could flee there and find refuge, and it's how Jethro was able to meet the Israelites near the mountain of God during the Exodus journey.
And what does archaeology tell us about them? Is there much evidence?
Archaeology related to the Midianites is a bit more limited than for some other groups. What we have tends to focus on distinctive pottery, sometimes called Quaraya ware, and evidence of copper working in regions like the Wadi Araba, which was a major ancient mining area.
Now, let's talk religion, because the general picture of Midianites presented in the Bible, apart from Jethro himself, isn't exactly aligned with Israelite worship.
Far from it. Yeah, they're often portrayed as engaging in polytheistic practices. Our sources highlight them being involved with divination, like the elders carrying objects for divination when King Balak summons Balaam in Numbers 22.
Right.
They famously participated in luring Israelites into idolatry and sexual immorality during that awful Baal of Peor incident in Numbers 25. And those crescent ornaments mentioned in Judges 8 suggest worship of a moon god, maybe?
So how do we square that with Jethro, who is consistently called the priest of Midian, Cohen Midian?
That's a core part of his uniqueness. While the title Cohen could, in theory, refer to priests of various gods in the ancient Near East, the biblical narrative strongly presents Jethro's priestly actions as being directed toward the God of the Hebrews, towards Yahweh.
Interesting.
Some even suggest his title might be more political, like a chieftain, or a general term for a spiritual leader within his clan, rather than specifically a priest of some pagan deity.
What's fascinating is his reaction after he hears about the Exodus from Moses.
Absolutely. He declares, "Now I know that the Lord is greater than all gods." That's Exodus 18, verses 10, 11.
Greater than all gods. How do the sources interpret that? Does it mean he believed other gods existed, but Yahweh was strongest?
That's one way it's been read, certainly. But our sources also explain that this phrase, greater than all gods, can be understood as a common Old Testament idiom. It emphasizes Yahweh's absolute supremacy and unparalleled power, not necessarily an acknowledgement that other gods actually exist, but are just weaker. It's a statement of Yahweh's unique status.
And he doesn't just say it, he acts on it. He offers sacrifices and shares a meal with Aaron and the Israelite elders right there in Exodus 18:12.
That participation is key. It strongly points towards a faith that is aligned with, or at least deeply respectful of, the God of Israel. This is where his Abrahamic lineage becomes theologically interesting.
Ah, right, through Keturah.
Exactly. Perhaps some knowledge or tradition of the God of Abraham was preserved within his particular branch of the family. It's a possibility the sources raise.
And Moses marrying his daughter Zipporah isn't portrayed as him compromising his faith or anything like that.
Not at all. In fact, Zipporah's actions in that mysterious circumcision incident back in Exodus 4 suggest she understood and was committed to that crucial covenant rite. She likely learned about the God of Abraham and the covenant through her father, Jethro.
And Jethro's own counsel to Moses later, the famous advice, is presented as divinely inspired, isn't it?
Exactly. When he gives his advice on setting up the judicial system, he frames it by saying things like, "And God be with you," and "if you do this, and God will direct you."
Yeah.
This suggests he had genuine wisdom and insight from God, even before Moses received the detailed law at Sinai.
So it's quite a picture, a figure from outside the immediate Israelite covenant community, yet potentially a monotheist, acknowledging Yahweh's supremacy, participating in worship, and offering divinely inspired counsel.
It really challenges any simple idea that divine truth or important wisdom was confined solely within the Israelite line from the very beginning. His existence implies a potential for shared understanding, or at least recognition of the true God, even among related peoples like his clan of Midianites.
Now, our sources do touch on some counter-arguments or alternative views to him being a staunch monotheist. Right?
They do, yes. Some interpretations point out that his monotheism seems quite exceptional compared to other Midianites we see in the narrative. That's fair.
Mm-hmm.
And some traditional readings of that greater than all gods phrase do see it as implying he had previously been idolatrous and was now acknowledging Yahweh's superiority over other deities he did believe existed or had believed existed.
And there's also that scholarly hypothesis, the Midianite hypothesis. What's that about again?
Yes, though our sources are careful to state this lacks strong scholarly consensus. It's a theory, really. It proposes that the worship of Yahweh actually originated in Midian, possibly through Jethro, and Moses was introduced to Yahweh this way, rather than Yahweh being the ancestral God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob from the start.
But the mainstream view presented in our sources seems to be that Jethro is this unique figure, a priest from a generally polytheistic background whose faith aligns with Yahweh.
Precisely. He represents this fascinating early interaction and suggests maybe a preservation of monotheistic understanding within some branches of Abraham's descendants beyond Isaac and Jacob. His role is really significant in that context.
And speaking of those connections, Jethro is also identified sometimes as a Kenite shepherd. What's the Kenite link?
Yes, the Kenites seem to be a distinct subtribe, or perhaps a closely related group, often linked with the Midianites in the biblical text. It's not always perfectly clear how they overlap.
And this Kenite link becomes particularly important for Hobab, doesn't it? the brother-in-law.
It does. Hobab's descendants are consistently called Kenites in later texts, like in Judges 1.16 and 4.11.
Okay.
These Kenites later settled alongside the tribe of Judah in the southern part of Canaan and generally maintained a positive and allied relationship with Israel throughout their history. Think of Jael, for instance, in the book of Judges.
Right. So their integration suggests that Hobab may well have decided to go with Israel into Canaan after all, despite his initial reluctance we read about in Numbers 10.
That seems likely, yes. Which brings us to Jethro's most direct, and you could argue, enduring impact on Moses and, by extension, on the whole structure of Israelite governance.
His influence starts much earlier than the judicial reform, though, doesn't it? I mean, Moses spent 40 years under Jethro's care, tending flocks in Midian, as we see in Exodus 3.1.
40 years. That's a long time for Moses to be sort of off the grid from Egypt, isn't it?
Yeah.
Our sources often see this period as a crucial time of preparation for Moses, like a school of aloneness, maybe, where he developed qualities like patience, humility, a deep understanding of pastoral care things he wouldn't have learned in the Egyptian court.
That makes sense. And Jethro's initial hospitality was foundational, giving Moses refuge when he was a fugitive, then his daughter Zipporah in marriage. That created a deep and lasting bond.
Absolutely. And after the Exodus, Jethro makes the effort to proactively bring Zipporah and their sons, Gershom and Eleazar, back to Moses in the wilderness. That's in Exodus 18. It shows ongoing care and familial responsibility.
It does.
Our sources even suggest Moses' flight to Midian and meeting Jethro can be seen as part of God's providential plan, setting the stage for Jethro to provide that vital help later on.
And that vital help, of course, is the famous judicial reform described in Exodus 18.
Precisely. Jethro arrives and observes Moses handling everything himself. He's sitting there from morning until evening, judging every single dispute for the entire Israelite camp. You can just imagine the scene.
That sounds absolutely exhausting for Moses and probably created huge bottlenecks for the people trying to get problems solved.
Utterly unsustainable. And Jethro saw it clearly. His wise counsel was direct and practical. The work is too heavy for you. You cannot handle it alone. That's Exodus 18.1. He saw it would wear Moses out and be incredibly inefficient for the people needing justice.
So his advice was essentially revolutionary delegation.
It really was. He advised Moses to appoint capable men from all the people, men who fear God, trustworthy men who hate dishonest gain. That's key criteria. And appoint them as officials over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. A whole hierarchy.
And Moses' role would shift.
Yes. Jethro advised that Moses' main job should be to be the representative to God, teach the laws and statutes, and bring only the hardest, most complex cases directly to God for decision.
Okay.
The appointed judges would handle all the simpler day-to-day disputes, making justice much quicker and more accessible for everyone involved.
And what's incredible is Moses' response. The text says he listened to his father-in-law and did everything he said. He actually implemented the system based on Jethro's advice.
It shows remarkable humility, doesn't it? And openness to counsel, even from someone who was, technically, outside the immediate Israelite covenant community. This episode powerfully highlights something important.
What's that?
That God's guidance isn't always delivered through direct commands or miracles solely to the central leader.
It can also come through wise, practical counsel offered by others, sometimes from unexpected places, but still aligned with God's purposes.
Absolutely. This blend of divine oversight, because Jethro frames it as God's will, and human organizational wisdom, coming via Jethro, fundamentally shaped the practical administration of early Israelite society.
It shows God can use diverse individuals, diverse channels.
Exactly. To achieve his goals for his people.
And Jethro's legacy in Hebrew life is massive from this. His counsel provided the fundamental blueprint for the initial governmental and judicial structure established in the wilderness. It ensured efficient justice and freed Moses up to focus on his unique roles as prophet and mediator.
His principles are so enduring that our sources note they're often discussed even today as the Jethro method in modern leadership theory.
Really? The Jethro method?
Yeah. Emphasizing the importance of delegation. Selecting leaders based on strong character, remember, fearing God, trustworthiness, integrity, and creating scalable structures to prevent burnout at the top. It's timeless wisdom.
And that judicial reform had a direct line of influence into later Jewish tradition, didn't it?
It did. It contributed significantly to the development of the sophisticated Jewish court system, eventually including the Sanhedrin. The qualities Jethro outlined for judges, fear of God, trustworthiness, hating dishonest gain, remained foundational criteria for judicial appointments throughout centuries of Jewish history.
So it wasn't just a temporary fix for a wilderness problem.
Not at all. It laid down a principle that shaped legal and communal life for millennia.
Wow. So what have we really pulled up in this deep dive? Moses's father-in-law, whether we're wrestling with calling him Jethro or Reuel, is far more complex and influential than he initially seems.
By looking closely at the original Hebrew, engaging with the scholarly analysis, we resolved that name puzzle. Jethro Reuel was the father-in-law, Hobab was his son, Moses' brother-in-law, thanks to understanding Chotin as that broader term, relative by marriage.
Right. It's a great example of how linguistic nuance clears up apparent contradictions.
And his origins reveal a truly unique figure, a priest from a Midianite culture generally associated with polytheism, yet very likely a monotheist who confessed Yahweh's supremacy and participated in Israelite worship.
He represents the powerful idea that wisdom and beneficial influence can come from outside the expected boundaries, outside the immediate covenant community.
And his impact, profound and lasting. From providing refuge and family to Moses, to giving the foundational blueprint for the judicial system that structured the Israelite nation and continued to influence Jewish law for centuries, that Jethro method of leadership and delegation.
This deep dive really shows us how engaging with the original text, understanding linguistic details, and appreciating the layers of literary composition unlocks a much richer, more accurate understanding of these ancient narratives and their contexts.
It takes a figure who might seem like a minor character and reveals him as a truly layered figure of theological and historical significance.
Yeah, this exploration of Jethro Reuel really makes you think about where crucial wisdom comes from, doesn't it?
It really does. His most impactful advice, the kind that structured a nation for centuries, came from outside the core Israelite community. Yet it was presented as divinely inspired and proved absolutely foundational.
It strongly challenges any assumption that essential insights or guidance are limited to one specific group or one channel or one background.
So what does that perspective open up for you when you're seeking knowledge, truth, or guidance? Where might wisdom show up in ways you weren't expecting?
Something to mull over.